I have been putting my hands in this soil for more than 25 years. I have grown things in this yard that fed my family. I have grown things that turned a plain patch of ground into something the whole street slowed down to look at. And I am going to be completely honest with you in the next few minutes, because that is the only way this works. I have also planted things in this exact yard that cost me entire seasons, drained money straight out of my pocket, and left me on my knees in the dirt cursing a decision I made years earlier. Today, I am going to walk you through every single one of those decisions. Not to make myself look foolish, although it will, and not because I enjoy reliving them. I am doing it because there is not a single person at your neighborhood garden center who is ever going to pull you aside and say, "Put that one back." Trust me, it will never happen. And the reason it will never happen is simple. They make their living off the cycle. When a plant takes over and you have to pay somebody to dig it out, they win. When a vine pries apart your fence and you are buying boards and brackets, they win. When something chokes out the bed you spent years building and you come back to replace what died, they win again. You lose every round, and the whole thing is designed that way. I am finished playing along with it. So before we start, I am asking you for one small thing. Type your US state or your USDA hardiness zone into the comments right now. Just a couple of words. I genuinely read them, and they tell me whether the advice I put out each week actually lands where you are standing. Go ahead and do it while it is on your mind. And do me a favor and stay with me all the way through, because right around number 6, I am going to get into a plant that sits on the shelf at practically every garden center in the country, dressed up as a charming little carpet of color, and it has quietly wrecked yards from one coast to the other. I am also going to hand you a real method for removing an aggressive perennial without pouring money into chemicals or contractors. That part alone is worth your time. Let's get into it. Number 1. Lily of the Valley, Convallaria majalis. I want to start here because this is the plant that fooled me the most thoroughly, and it fooled me precisely because it looks so gentle. Those tiny white bells, that sweet perfume drifting across the yard in late spring, the tidy carpet of broad green leaves under a shade tree where nothing else seemed happy. My grandmother grew it. It felt like planting a memory. The first spring it behaved exactly like the picture in my head, and I told myself I had found the perfect solution for that difficult shady corner. What the little tag never mentioned is that lily of the valley does not grow outward politely. It advances. Underneath the soil, it runs a dense web of horizontal rhizomes called pips, and each one is a launching point for the next. The patch does not get bigger by inches. It marches. Within 3 seasons, my charming little memory garden had pushed clear out of the shade and into the lawn, had slipped under a brick border I thought would hold it, and was coming up among the hostas 8 feet from where I set the first plants. And here is the part that genuinely surprised me after all those years. Every part of this plant is toxic. Leaves, flowers, the bright red berries it produces, all of it. That matters if you have grandchildren who visit or a dog that chews on things in the yard. Pulling it does almost nothing, because the rhizomes sit deep and snap off cleanly, and every fragment left behind simply starts over. I want you to really picture the timeline, because that is the part the tag will never show you. Year 1, it is a polite little ring of green and you congratulate yourself. Year 2, the ring has doubled and you think it is finally filling in nicely. Year 3, you realize it is not filling a space anymore, it is taking territory, and the leaves are so dense and so tall that nothing underneath them sees a ray of light. That dense canopy is part of the strategy. It does not just spread sideways, it shades out and starves whatever it lands on top of. So by the time you notice the problem, the plants you actually wanted are already gone. I spent the better part of 2 weekends one fall digging mine out by the spadeful, sifting the soil between my fingers for every pale little pip I could find, and I still had it coming up the following spring from the pieces I missed. In USDA zones 2 through 7, it is essentially permanent once established, and cold does not phase it in the slightest. If you want fragrance and white spring bloom in the shade without the takeover, plant native foam flower Tiarella cordifolia, hardy in zones 4 through 9. It gives you delicate flower spikes, handsome foliage, and it stays in a clump where you put it. That is the trade, and it is a good one. Number 2. Goutweed, also sold as bishop's weed. Agopodium podagraria. I almost laughed when I learned the common name, because by the time I understood what I had done, I felt like I had earned the gout. This one is usually sold in its variegated form, that cream and green leaf that looks crisp and bright in a nursery pot and seems like the answer to a dull, shady bed. It is cheap, it is everywhere, and it establishes fast. That speed should have been my warning, but I read it as a feature instead of a threat. Goutweed spreads by a network of brittle underground rhizomes that fracture the instant you disturb them, and every broken piece is a new plant in the making. So the harder you fight it by hand, the faster it multiplies. You are not weeding it, you are propagating it, one frustrated tug at a time. There is something else the label conveniently leaves out. The pretty variegated form tends to revert. Over a few seasons, patches of it drop the cream coloring and come back as plain aggressive green, and that solid green form is even more vigorous than the version you bought. By my third year, it had jumped its bed, run along the foundation, and woven itself through the roots of an established shrub so completely that I could not separate the two. I have known gardeners who finally gave up and built a brand new bed somewhere else entirely rather than keep fighting the old one, and I understand the impulse, because there comes a point where the math on your own labor stops making sense. In zones 3 through 9, it laughs at winter and returns every spring with interest. The honest alternative for a bright, well-behaved shade carpet is native wild ginger, Asarum canadense, hardy in zones 4 through 8, or Allegheny spurge, Pachysandra procumbens in zones 5 through 9. Both cover ground, both stay civil, and both actually belong in our ecosystems instead of bullying their way through them. Number 3. Comfrey Symphytum officinale. Now I want to be careful here, because there is a whole corner of the gardening world that treats this plant like a miracle, and I understand exactly why they fell for it, because I fell for it too. You will read that comfrey is a dynamic accumulator, that its deep roots mine nutrients from far below the surface, that you can chop the leaves for mulch or steep them into a free liquid fertilizer, that bees adore the flowers. Every bit of that is true, and that is precisely the trap. The benefits are real, which is what makes the regret so much sharper. Here is what the enthusiastic blog posts skip over. Comfrey anchors itself with a thick, brittle taproot that drives straight down, and I mean down, well past where any normal digging reaches. If you try to dig it out and leave so much as a slice of that root in the ground, and you will leave a slice, it does not survive in some weakened state. It rebounds with vigor and frequently sends up several new crowns where there was one. I put a few plants in along the edge of my vegetable garden, picturing an endless supply of free mulch. Within 2 seasons, those few plants had become an immovable hedge, and any attempt to relocate the bed meant fighting a root system that simply would not let go. And I want to be specific about why this one is so much worse to remove than an ordinary spreader. Because it caught me off guard even after all my years out here. With a shallow runner, you can at least see what you are dealing with. With comfrey, the heart of the plant is a foot or more straight down, fat and brittle and ready to snap, and a shovel only ever takes the top of it. What stays behind in the soil is more than capable of rebuilding the entire plant, and it does so with real enthusiasm, often coming back thicker than what you removed. I have heard from people who tried to smother it, who tilled it, who even tried to dig down past where any reasonable person should have to dig, and it came back anyway. In zones 3 through 9, it is there for life, unless you excavate seriously and stay vigilant for years. If you want the pollinator value and a bold leafy presence, without sentencing yourself to that taproot, grow Anise hyssop, Agastache funiculum, hardy in zones 4 through 8. The bees will not know the difference, and you will be able to move it whenever you change your mind. Let me stop for a second and say something plainly, because nobody at the Big Box Garden Center is going to say it for you. Nobody walked over while you were holding that pot of comfrey and said, "Before you buy this, let me describe what digging it out looks like." Nobody pointed at the goutweed and said, "This will revert to its mean green form and outrun your whole bed in 2 summers." They do not do that, and they are never going to do that, because their entire model is built on your enthusiasm in the moment and your return trip when it all goes sideways. They profit from the next purchase. They do not profit from your yard thriving 5 years from now. That gap, that exact gap, is the whole reason this channel exists. So, if you have not already, I need you to hit that subscribe button right now. Not at the end, right now. The way the algorithm works, it only reliably brings you videos from channels it already knows you follow. If you watch this all the way through and keep scrolling without subscribing, there is a genuine chance you never see the next one, and the next one might be the one that saves your yard. It is free, it takes 2 seconds, and it tells me to keep making this for you. Tap it, and let's keep moving. Number 4. Oriental bittersweet, Celastrus orbiculatus. This is where the conversation turns from frustrating to structurally dangerous, so I want you to pay close attention even if you have never heard the name. Oriental bittersweet gets planted and gets passed along between neighbors because of those bright orange and red berries in autumn. People cut the vines for wreaths and fall arrangements, the birds love the fruit, and on a crisp October afternoon it looks absolutely gorgeous twining up a fence. I planted it for exactly that reason. By the second year I understood I had brought home something closer to a slow-moving disaster. This is a woody vine that climbs by spiraling tightly around whatever it touches, and as the stem thickens year over year, that spiral becomes a tourniquet. It strangles. It will wind around a young tree and constrict it so severely that it cuts off the tree's ability to move water and nutrients, and over several seasons it can kill a tree 2 or 3 times its age. Mature vines can reach the thickness of a man's wrist and climb 60 feet into a canopy, and the sheer accumulated weight up there turns an otherwise healthy tree into a falling hazard in the first heavy ice storm. On top of all that, the berries do not stay home. Birds eat them and scatter the seed into every hedgerow and woodlot for miles, which is why this plant is listed as invasive across great stretches of the eastern United States. You are not just risking your own trees, you are seeding the wild places around you. And there is a cruel little wrinkle to this one that makes it even harder to manage. There is a native cousin, American bittersweet, that looks similar enough that people confuse them, and the two will even hybridize, which muddies the genetics of the native and makes the aggressive oriental traits even more widespread. So the well-meaning gardener who thinks they bought the native version has, in many cases, brought home the invader or a hybrid that behaves just like it. By the time I worked out what I actually had on my fence, it had already climbed into a neighboring crabapple and begun the slow squeeze. In zones 4 through 8, it is relentless, and removal means cutting and treating every stem and then chasing root sprouts for years. If you want a climbing vine with knockout fall color, plant native crossvine, Bignonia capreolata, hardy in zones 6 through 9, or for cooler areas, native Virginia creeper, Parthenocissus quinquifolia, in zones 3 through 9. You get the show without the strangulation. Number 5. Ribbon grass, Phalaris arundinacea variety picta. I have a real soft spot for ornamental grasses, and that soft spot is exactly how this one got past me. Ribbon grass has those clean white and green striped blades that catch the light and sway in every breeze, and it is sold as a graceful, carefree clump for the border. The word clump is doing some very dishonest work on that label. This is not a clumping grass. It is a runner, and a fast one. Beneath the soil, it sends out rhizomes that travel aggressively in all directions, and it is especially happy near water or in any spot that stays moist, which is often the exact place people plant it. What looks like a tidy fountain of striped foliage in spring becomes, within a couple of seasons, a sprawling colony that has swallowed everything tame around it. Mine started as a single nursery pot at the corner of a damp bed. By the third summer, it had run the entire length of that bed, crossed into the lawn, and was elbowing out a clump of iris I had divided and babied for years. Pulling the top growth accomplishes nothing, because the running rhizomes are the engine, and they keep right on going underground. And here is a detail that makes ribbon grass especially sneaky. It tolerates being mowed, it tolerates drought once it is established, and it tolerates standing water, which means there is almost no condition harsh enough to discourage it on its own. You will not get lucky with a hard winter or a dry spell. In zones 4 through 9, it persists through anything winter throws at it. If you love the movement and texture of grass in the garden, plant a native bunch grass that actually stays put. Little bluestem, Schizachyrium scoparium, hardy in zones 3 through 9, gives you gorgeous blue-green summer color that turns coppery in fall, and switchgrass, Panicum virgatum, in zones 4 through 9, gives you height and a beautiful upright form. Both grow in defined clumps. Neither one goes hunting through your yard. Number 6. Creeping Jenny, Lysomachia nummularia. This is the one I flagged for you at the very start. The innocent-looking ground cover hiding in plain sight at nearly every garden center in the country, and I want to be precise so you know exactly what you are looking at. Creeping Jenny, especially the golden form sold as Arraya, is marketed on those round, coin-shaped chartreuse leaves that glow against darker plants and spill so prettily over the edge of a pot or a wall. It is sold for rain gardens, for pond edges, for that troublesome low spot that stays soggy, and it does indeed thrive in moisture and light shade where pickier plants sulk. That very toughness is the whole problem. Here is what the cheerful label refuses to mention. Creeping Jenny spreads by stems that creep flat along the ground and root at every single node where they touch soil. It does not need seed to take over. It just keeps walking, rooting as it goes, forming a dense mat that smothers everything underneath it. Pulling it up is almost comical, because the rooted stems break into pieces and each rooted fragment you leave behind simply carries on. I planted it as edging around a damp bed beside the house because I wanted that bright trailing skirt of gold. Within a single season, it had jumped the edging, Within 2, it was rooting out in the lawn and creeping under the lowest branches of the foundation shrubs, and it had reached a small water feature and was happily colonizing the margins. In zones 3 through 9, in any spot with moisture, it has no natural break. It simply keeps going until something solid stops it. And do not assume a dry summer will save you, because it will retreat and look beaten, then surge right back the moment the rain returns, often into ground you thought you had cleared. The native answer for a bright, low, well-mannered carpet is green and gold, Chrysogonum virginianum, hardy in zones 5 through 9. It offers cheerful yellow flowers, stays low, holds its position, and feeds native pollinators in a way creeping Jenny never will. Number 7. Purple loosestrife, Lythrum salicaria. I want to handle this one gently, because I know some of you have a genuine fondness for it, and I understand that fondness completely. Those tall magenta spikes blazing along a ditch or a pond edge in midsummer are honestly beautiful, and for generations people dug a piece from a roadside or a neighbor's yard and brought it home because it was free, it was easy, and it bloomed its heart out. I did the same thing. But I have to draw a line here that the garden center will never draw for you, because this is not simply a plant that spreads in your yard. This is a plant that escapes your yard and damages the natural world beyond it. Purple loosestrife is a staggering seed producer. A single mature plant can release millions of tiny seeds in a season, and they ride water and wind into every wetland nearby. Once it reaches a marsh or a stream bank, it forms dense monocultures that crowd out the native cattails and sedges and rushes that waterfowl, fish, and amphibians actually depend on. Ecologists do not mince words about it. It converts living, varied wetland into a wall of a single plant, and the wildlife that needed the variety simply leaves. In your own ground, it is no picnic either, with a tough woody crown that resists pulling and resprouts from the smallest piece left behind. There is one more thing worth knowing before you ever consider it, because the nurseries learned to be clever about this. After the damage became undeniable, sellers began marketing so-called sterile cultivars, promising they would not set seed. The trouble is those cultivars can still cross-pollinate with wild loosestrife and with each other, so the sterility is not nearly as reliable as the label implies, and seed escapes anyway. It is hardy and prolific across zones 3 through 9. If you love that vertical spike of purple, the native answer is dense blazing star, Liatris spicata, hardy in zones 3 through 9, or blue vervain, Verbena hastata, for moist spots. You keep the color and the pollinators, and you stop seeding a problem into wetlands that took thousands of years to assemble. Let me pause right here, because if you are sitting there recognizing one of these plants already growing in your own yard, I do not want to just leave you with the bad news. You need an actual plan, so here is one you can use. The first thing to understand is that timing changes everything when you are removing an aggressive perennial. The most effective window for cutting back or treating most of these plants is late summer into early fall, after the peak growing push is over, when the plant is naturally drawing its energy down out of the leaves and back into the roots for winter. If you cut and treat in that window, the plant's own internal traffic carries the work downward for you, instead of fighting you. For the rhizome and stem runners on this list, things like creeping jenny, ribbon grass, goutweed, and lily of the valley, the strongest tool you have that requires no chemicals at all is what I call the blackout method. Cut every bit of top growth down as close to the ground as you can manage, then lay down overlapping sheets of heavy cardboard across the entire area, the thick kind from furniture or appliance boxes, at least 2 layers, and overlap the seams by 6 or 8 inches so there is not a single gap for a shoot to find. Soak it down with water until it is thoroughly wet. Then bury the whole thing under 6 to 8 inches of arborist wood chips, the rough kind a tree crew drops off, not bark nuggets and not decorative stone, because you want material that mats down and creates a dark, airless zone underneath. Now leave it completely alone for a full 12 months. No lifting the corner to check. No shortcuts at month 4. A full year. When you finally pull that cardboard back, the overwhelming majority of the root system will have starved in the dark. You will still patrol for stragglers, but you will have broken the plant's back. For the woody structural offenders, the bittersweet, and anything with thick climbing or running wood, there is no easy carpet to smother. Cut the main stem right at ground level in late summer, and then immediately, while the cut is still wet and open, apply a concentrated stump treatment to that fresh surface. You have a window of maybe 30 seconds to 2 minutes before the cut begins to seal and refuse to take it, so have everything ready before you make the cut. Then stay on it. Every root sprout that pushes up over the rest of the season gets cut to the ground the moment you see it, before a single leaf can open and feed the roots again. Every sprout you remove forces the plant to spend more of its stored reserves, and eventually those reserves run dry. It is not glamorous, but it is how the war is actually won. And here is the single biggest mistake I see people make, the one that undoes all the rest. They attack the problem hard for 2 or 3 weeks, get tired, notice the new growth has slowed, decide they have beaten it, and walk away. Then it quietly recovers and they are back where they started the following spring. You cannot do that. You have to be stubborn about it, and you have to stay on it through a complete growing season at the absolute minimum. Set a reminder on your phone if that is what it takes. Cut every shoot, every time, no exceptions. Do not hand it a single season to catch its breath. That relentlessness is the whole secret, and it costs you nothing but consistency. Number 8. Periwinkle, also called vinca. Vinca minor and the larger vinca major. English ivy gets all the attention as the ground cover that turned into a monster, but periwinkle deserves to stand right beside it. And in my experience, it slips past more gardeners precisely because it seems so much more delicate. Periwinkle is sold as the answer to your hardest problems. A shady slope where grass refuses to grow, a dry, root-filled patch under a big tree, a bank you are tired of trying to mow, and it does exactly what the label promises in the beginning, knitting together into a glossy evergreen carpet dotted with those pretty little blue-violet flowers in spring. That early success is the bait. What the label leaves out is what that carpet becomes. Periwinkle spreads by trailing stems that root wherever they touch the ground, and it builds a mat so thick and continuous that it shuts out the light a forest floor needs to regenerate. Under an established blanket of periwinkle, native tree seedlings cannot get started, spring wildflowers cannot push through, and the ground-level life that birds and insects depend on simply vanishes. It does not stay in the bed you planted either. It creeps relentlessly into adjacent woodland, and across much of the country it has become a serious invader of natural areas for exactly that reason. There is also a quieter cost that took me years to appreciate. A bed of periwinkle looks green and alive, so people assume it is doing something good for the yard, when in reality, it is one of the most biologically empty things you can grow. Almost nothing native eats it, almost nothing nests in it, and the spring ephemerals, the trout lily and bloodroot and trillium that ought to be coming up through that ground, never get the chance because the mat is already there waiting for them. You end up with a yard that is technically covered and ecologically silent. In zones 4 through 9 for the smaller form, and into warmer zones for the larger one, it persists indefinitely and resprouts from fragments, so hand pulling tends to spread it as much as reduce it. The honest alternative for a tough, shady slope is native Pennsylvania sedge, Carex pennsylvanica, hardy in zones 3 through 8 for a soft, flowing green carpet, or foam flower and wild ginger for shadier ground. These cover the difficult places, hold the soil, and support the web of life around them instead of erasing it. I want to ask you to do something for someone you care about before we get to the last plant. Picture one person in your life who gardens. A parent, a neighbor over the fence, an old friend, somebody who heads off to the garden center every spring full of hope and comes home with things that turn into headaches. Somebody who has very likely already planted one or two of the things we have talked about today without any idea what they were signing up for. Send them this video right now. I mean it. Pause for 10 seconds, copy the link, and send it. One text message, one email, one share on Facebook. The information in these few minutes can save that person multiple seasons of backbreaking work and a genuine pile of money they would much rather keep. You know how much it would have meant if somebody had handed this to you before you made some of these same calls. Pass it forward, send it now, and then come right back, because the final plant is the one that produces the legal letters, the cracked foundations, and the removal bills that run into the thousands. Number 9. Japanese knotweed, Reinutria japonica, also sold over the years under names like Falopia and Polygonum. I saved this one for last because, in 25 years of gardening and a great many conversations with people who have lived through their own disasters, this is the plant that generates the most extreme stories, the most expensive professional bills, and the deepest regret. It was originally sold as an ornamental, prized for its fast growth and its tall bamboo-like canes that make a quick privacy screen, and even today it gets shared between neighbors who have no idea what they are passing along. Let me describe what it actually does, because you need to understand the mechanism before you hear the cost. Japanese knotweed spreads through an immense network of underground rhizomes that can run many feet from the visible plant and plunge surprisingly deep. Those rhizomes are powerful enough to exploit cracks in concrete, push up through asphalt, work into the joints of retaining walls, and probe the foundations of buildings. And the regenerative power of this plant is almost hard to believe. A piece of rhizome the size of your fingernail, or even a fragment of a cut stem, is enough to start an entirely new colony, which means careless cutting or moving contaminated soil simply spreads it to new locations. I have spoken with homeowners, ordinary people, and not rare worst-case stories who watched a small stand planted along a property line become a thicket that crossed into two neighboring yards within a handful of years. One fellow told me the canes came up through a crack in his patio slab and lifted the corner of it before he understood what he was even dealing with. In many places, the presence of knotweed now affects property sales and triggers disclosure requirements, and disputes between neighbors over encroachment have become a real and growing corner of the law. I want you to sit with that for a second, because it is genuinely rare among garden plants. We are talking about a perennial you can buy or be handed by a friendly neighbor that can lower the value of your home and put you on the receiving end of a letter from an attorney. Removal is not a weekend job. To deal with it properly, you cut every cane to the ground to shut off photosynthesis. Then treat and monitor and retreat across multiple seasons, cutting every new shoot the instant it appears so it cannot recharge the rhizomes below. You also cannot simply bag the cuttings and toss them in the yard waste, because a fragment that ends up in a compost pile or a dumped load of fill is fully capable of starting the whole nightmare somewhere new. Professional excavation of an established stand, which means physically digging out that deep rhizome web and hauling away contaminated soil, commonly runs from a couple $1,000s into the five-figure range for a serious infestation, and even that is not a guarantee without years of follow-up. In zones 4 through 8, it shrugs off winter completely and surges back every spring. If what you actually wanted was a fast, tall screen, give yourself a real solution instead. Native elderberry, Sambucus canadensis, hardy in zones 3 through 9, fills in quickly, flowers, and feeds wildlife. And arrowwood viburnum, Viburnum dentatum, in zones 3 through 8, gives you a dense, handsome, well-behaved screen. Both grow where you put them, and never send a rhizome under your driveway or your neighbor's foundation. Let me do one last piece of plain arithmetic with you before we wrap up. A serious professional knotweed removal can easily run you $2,000 to $5,000, and that is before you account for any repairs to a cracked walkway or foundation, any soil disposal fees, or any legal headaches if it has crossed a property line. Now compare that to the alternative. 3 young elderberry or viburnum shrubs from a decent nursery will cost you somewhere in the neighborhood of $75 to $150 total, and within 2 or 3 seasons you have a full, attractive screen that will never cost you another cent in damage. Sit with those two numbers for a moment. Several $1,000s and years of stress on one side, $100 and a clear conscience on the other. And that same arithmetic holds for nearly everything on this list. The blackout method I gave you cost you a stack of cardboard you were going to recycle anyway, and a load of wood chips most tree crews will drop off for free. A handful of well-chosen native plants costs a fraction of what you will spend replacing the things an invader kills. The expensive path is almost always the one that looked easy and cheap on the day you bought it. That is not a difficult decision. It only looks difficult on the day you are standing in the garden center holding the wrong plant. This channel exists because gardeners deserve the truth, the specific and useful truth, and not just a beautiful photograph next to a cheerful paragraph that quietly omits the one fact that would have changed your mind. Not a sales floor arranged to make an impulse feel like wisdom. Not advice that is tuned to what moves off the shelf fastest rather than what is going to serve your yard and your wallet over the next 5 and 10 years. What I covered with you today, 9 plants, the real way each of them spreads, what each of them truly costs to remove, and a native alternative for every single one, is exactly the kind of information that should have been printed right there on the tag. It was not, because that information does not help anyone sell more plants. I am not selling you anything. I have nothing on a shelf and nothing in a cart. This channel is here because gardeners in their 50s, 60s, and beyond have spent too many seasons taking enthusiastic advice that leaves out the details that matter most. And they have always deserved better than that. You have earned the kind of straight talk a good neighbor over the fence would give you, the kind that costs them nothing to say and saves you a fortune to hear, and that is exactly what I am going to keep handing you, week after week, for as long as you keep showing up. Before you go, I want 2 things from you down in the comments. First, tell me what state you are gardening in, if you have not already dropped it in. I use that to make sure what I put out each week genuinely fits the conditions where you actually live and dig. Second, and this one might help the next person more than anything I said today, tell me which plant on this list surprised you the most, or, if you are being really honest, which one you already regret planting. Your story sitting there in the comments is not just feedback for me. It is a warning flag for the next gardener who finds this video and scrolls down looking for real experience from people who have actually wrestled these plants out of the ground. And if you are not subscribed yet, do it now. It is free, it is permanent, it is weekly, and it is no nonsense. No subscription fees, no products, no sponsored plant of the month. Just what works, what does not, and what it really costs. Delivered to you straight. I will see you in the next one.